Everybody. It's another episode of the Nonprofit Show. We have one of our faves back with us, Kirsten Wantland. She is a principal industry strategist with Bloomerang. We're going to get into that. It's like what it means and what is her work entailing. But today we're going to be talking about donor loss. Wow, Kirsten, this is a big topic, isn't it?
It sure is. I think there's always a lot of kind of advice and opinions in the sector on how do we really switch, but no one really explains what that difference can do for you. So I'm excited to kind of dig into it.
I love it. I love that you said that because I think that is just super wise. You're right. A lot of times we hear things and we get panicked like, oh, we got to do it, but then we don't really know why or what the impact's going to be. So
Mhm.
I know this is going to be an amazing conversation, and I'm super excited to be doing this with you today. We have amazing partners here. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, here with you today on the Nonprofit Show. Okay, Kirsten, we were talking about this briefly in the green room. And you have been on the show a few times. We always love what you have to say. But talk to us about this new promotion and direction that you're taking with Bloomerang.
Yeah, it's very cool. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So a lot of my work at Bloomerang has been with our fundraising clients, and I'm a certified nonprofit consultant and development executive. So really what this position allows me to do is kind of maximize that impact and take it not just from that one-on-one with clients, but to any customer that's using the platform. So what my role is going to be now is working on the engineering team and with the product team to ensure that all of our workflows are really supporting the customer in the way that the industry is kind of needing. And then I'm also going to be doing a lot of cool research and keeping Bloomerang customers up to trend with what's going on in the sector at present. And then the most exciting part about my new role is I am working on our new strategic fundraising partner called Penny.
Ooh, okay. I have not heard about that. Is
Yeah.
that something you can talk about and chat just
Yep.
briefly?
So
Okay,
Penny,
because sometimes these things are secret, you have
yeah,
to wait.
no. No, I think marketing would have my head if that were not public yet. But as we're working on Penny, so what Penny is going to be essentially your strategic AI fundraising partner. So part of my work at Bloomerang now on the engineering team is kind of developing these fundraising playbooks that Penny's going to be able to recommend to customers. So if a customer is saying, awesome, hey, it's the end of the year, what do I do today? How can I kind of maximize my retention, for example? Penny is going to be able to give you that strategic advice to say, this is the segment we should work on. This is the messaging you can use. Here are the best prospects. So oftentimes there's so much noise in the sector. Everything towards the end of the year kind of feels like the highest priority. So this is really going to allow fundraisers to maximize their impact and kind of take that priority question out and really just have a partner. So many of the teams that I've worked with at Bloomerang in my last couple of years consulting here, I've worked with hundreds of our organizations, and we're talking about, one-person shops, two-person shops, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be that thought partner that can help watch your back and then also alert you if there's some trends that are happening that maybe we don't want to happen, and even helping you understand those benchmarks to the sector, what's normal for organizations of my size or of my kind. So it really is kind of this all-encompassing strategic partner. Just pretend it's someone like me that's kind of got your back right in the platform, and then it's going to leverage your data. So your donor data, all of that's going to be able to analyze everything. So it's very exciting to work on.
Wow, really cool. I love that you can take your knowledge and your interactions back to the development team, the programming team, because
Yeah.
that's one of the things in software is you get these great minds and they can do all of the programming, but they don't have the knowledge of what it's like to work in whatever the sector is that they're
Yeah, yeah. So think of
right?
me kind of as resident expert and liaison to engineering, right? So
I love it.
it's been a very interesting world for me to be in as well because my work with engineering teams and the product teams, it's so different. It's so clear because everybody has to really understand critically what they're talking about and what they're doing in order to implement features. So it's very cool kind of getting a peek into that world and then being able to say, wait, let's think about this and let's think about how the fundraiser would use this. So I think it's going to be a very impactful position in the next couple of years of Bloomerang.
I love it. I think that's really exciting. Well, we're going to have a lot to chat about because, as you march forward with these technological changes and additions, and that's one of the things about your organization. You're always growing and adding new components to your products. And so let's talk about this piece of it with retention tracking, because that's been something that is, and I said this in the green room to you, for
Mhm.
some folks, it's a mystery. For a lot, it's a beat down because you just like get so freaked out that
Yeah.
you're not retaining your donors. Talk to us about this tracking and how sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I'll go like 30,000 foot view, right?
Sure,
What does
sure.
retention tracking even mean? I'll speak to it on a calendar year basis. So when we're talking about retention tracking, what that means is how many donors, how many individual donors did you have last calendar year? So in 2024, how many of those same donors did you keep again? And now there's national benchmarks for what's kind of normal, and we've seen the trend fluctuate a couple of percentage points over the last, decade and some change. But ultimately, how most fundraisers or most organizations kind of approach this retention tracking is we measure that on a calendar basis. It's very cyclical with how,
Yeah,
generosity is kind of matched up with the holiday season, right? So the
great.
majority of our revenue is going to come in the last 2 months, last 6 weeks of the year. That's like 30%, right? In that time period. So oftentimes, the first time that we start thinking about retention is towards the end of the year. And we're
Right.
already putting ourselves in kind of this reactive position where then towards the end of the year, it does feel like there's so much to prioritize and we're kind of tapped out because we've been working so hard at our goals all year that it's difficult to kind of get that additional focus or that additional prioritization. So this is where traditional retention is going to fail, is because it's all reactive. And even if we do start thinking about it towards the end of the year where we still have time to work on it, let's say in that last 2 months, maybe even 3 months, that's if we're still kind of being proactive, right? Oftentimes we'll get into that next year and be like, oh, I wonder what our retention was last year. Let's take a look at it, right? So it's very reactive.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why, frankly, people don't want to look at it.
No, yeah, and it's kind
Right?
of like ignored, or
Yeah.
if we don't meet the national average for some reason, there feels like a lot of shame, but we're not meant to
Yeah.
retain every donor always, right? So it's how can we maximize the right folks, build some loyalty? Those are the kinds of positive benefits we get from
Mhm.
changing that approach.
I love that you said that. So this is something I can't wait to learn about because, again, I mentioned this to you in the green room. I've
Mhm.
never heard of this, and it's called rolling retention. Teach me about this so I can calm myself down when I'm thinking about retention.
Yeah, so when I think of rolling retention, I think of it almost like a rolling weather forecast, right? If you open up your
Mhm.
weather app today, you've got
True.
14 days of visibility where you kind of know what the weather's going to be, you know. Think of it in that manner where when we think of rolling retention, it's going to give you a little bit of visibility into who your retention risks are. So we're not even waiting for them to lapse, right? We are using this in a predictive manner where we're going to say, hey, these people gave in the last year, the last 365 days to be exact, and
Mhm.
then they haven't given in the most recent 9 months. So really, we have 1 day to 90 days of saying these people are on my radar because they are going to lapse soon. And that's according to like the perfect industry standard that every donor gives a gift every year. Now, the
Mhm.
caveat to this is we're not waiting or aligning this visibility with a certain time in the calendar year. I'm doing that as of today. So today is December 9th. let's say, for example, I have supporters from last calendar year that gave sometime between December and February, but haven't given since. Those are the folks that are going to be on my radar now. So I can start thinking about how to involve them, make the kind of like proactive touches with them, plan an appeal to reach out to them. If they're major donors, start coordinating events or touch points or talks, etc. So this is where we start changing that kind of reactive sense of, oh no, it's kind of too late to do anything, into what do I need to do now? And there's a lot of really powerful tools on the market that can help you get this visibility with your CRM. I'm most experienced in Bloomerang. So for example, that will kind of give you the assessment where you can set up a lot of dynamic reporting to say, let this be on my radar. And I just get a list like every Monday of people who are going to lapse in the next 90 days. And then that's where I start to do my critical fundraising work, is by retaining those folks, knowing that they're going to lapse.
Okay, so let me drill down a little bit, because when I hear the word lapse and the way we're talking about it right now, I'm thinking about somebody who has made a commitment to be a monthly donor, and it's not a perpetual gift. I mean, it's got to be renewed. Okay, so that's number one. But I'm thinking about that person that maybe attended an event, they purchased tickets, they spent money at the auction, and then they haven't really been called or engaged for a period of time, except when it rolls back around trying to sell them tickets. Or do you put those two experiences together, or do you separate those out?
I mean, in the biggest point of visibility, if we're strictly just talking this rolling retention metric, that plays a part in your bottom line in your fundraising efforts, in the amount of money that you raise for your event. So yes, I do want them included in this visibility. We can get very particular and kind of exclude them for certain segments. This is where we should be kind of thinking about that post-event follow-up, and how do we turn those event supporters into sustainers, where they're kind of giving consistently at the organization. We're figuring out what that connection was. That is one thing that I fight against in the sector is, oh, they just gave a tribute gift, maybe I don't want to solicit them again, or they just came to an event. That doesn't count. It does count. It does count to the amount of money that you've raised for the causes that you are championing. So ultimately, it does kind of play into the bigger picture. I do include them in that bucket for this.
Okay, cool. I'm glad that you talked about that, because that is something that I see. We separate those types of gifts out, and then yeah. Okay, great. So you've kind of helped us to understand that this is not just about the traditional sustainer, giving society, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it can include anybody who's touched your organization financially. So I got to ask this question. Can we benchmark ourselves internally? We know that we have access to national metrics, and we have, you know, we have a lot of information out there, but when it comes to our own efforts, I got to frankly ask this question, if we haven't been tracking and we haven't been measuring, like, kind of, where do we start and how do we plan for our growth?
I think you hit the nail on the head there to say, at first say, if we haven't been, right? Because that's the biggest thing. If we don't have anything to pull or any data to look at, then we're not going to have anywhere to start. So that's the first part, is understanding and keeping those systems updated, so you really do get the analytics that you're looking for to make strategic change. So let's say, for example, I'm only putting transactions into my CRM like once a month, right? That's not really going to give you a lot of leverage for like in-time insights. So how do you change a process to make it less cumbersome, and then have that data more readily available? So that's the first point. And then when you're looking at what benchmarks should I even look for, this is where you can look at those industry benchmarks. For example, retention, average gift size, lapsed donor recapture rates, right? That's when you're starting to look at those metrics. and then understanding how you're going to calculate them within your system, and then keeping track of that on a regular timed basis. So let's say, for example, monthly, if you want to track that information, you spend maybe a couple of hours doing analytics at the end of the month or the beginning of the next month. That's when you're going to start to see that change. And this could be as simple as an Excel sheet, right? Or a Google sheet where you're saying, what's this metric? What's the date I pull it? Awesome. What does that mean? And this is where you can kind of leverage those consulting relationships to help you figure out that strategy.
Mm-hmm. So if you're an organization and really any size,
Mm-hmm.
and you've never done this, it seems overwhelming. Should we just like pick one or two things to track and build upon that? Or should we go all out and say, we got to start tracking all of these things? Because
Yeah,
ultimately, you've got to have some years behind you, right? You got to have some seasons.
you do. But my best advice is to say, let's start. Okay, either way, it's six in one hand, half a dozen in the other, right? Where
Mhm.
you're going to either pull all the metrics at once, but what I want you to focus on is just a handful of them, deeply
Okay.
understanding that metric. And that starts with generally retention. That's one of the most understood kind of principles in the sector. But let's say, for example, we're understanding your retention first. We have to start now so we can start having that visibility of how it changes, understanding your donor patterns, etc. So
Right.
I would say it doesn't really matter how many analytics you pull now. It's more how many do we focus on at a time, right? So understanding those bigger core concepts first, getting a really good grasp of what your strategy is going to be to improve that, implementing a couple of things, seeing if that makes any change, and then you're going to move on to the next kind of big area of focus. I was working in the quarterly consulting program here at Bloomerang for the last couple of years. And I worked on a quarterly basis with organizations. And so I would ultimately give them two focuses each quarter to say, awesome, we're really going to focus on your retention here. And then next quarter, we're going to focus on your donor loyalty so we can see what changes we're going to make there. The other thing to note is that when we start tracking and making changes, doing different things, track those interactions you're having with customers, track the meetings you're having with customers, with donors, right? So you're not going to see these changes overnight. So it's kind of like building a 7-layer cake. You're just kind of
Mhm.
adding all these new strategies, one on top of another, and then you start to see a lot of things change at once. But you have to give it time because it's not as satisfying as maybe writing an appeal or writing a grant and getting $1 million. This is
Right.
going to be the strategic long haul shift that changes the way your donor base operates and kind of shows up for you in the community when we start prioritizing all of those different efforts. So Julia, you mentioned earlier, like the person that came to the event, right? I had an organization where they sold pies every spring and they're like, oh, well, they just buy a pie. It's okay. It's, we don't have to retain them. They're always going to buy the pie. The pie is awesome.
Oh,
Even if we buy that pie, they could always choose to buy that pie from somewhere else. So we want to still
yeah.
acknowledge that, reward that, give them other opportunities to be involved. And that's where we start to see some of those changes.
So before we go on to the next question, I want to make sure that I have confirmed what I heard you say, and that is maybe a good strategy is to really focus and drill down on a particular one or two things each quarter, knowing that you have that period of time with which to perfect or
Mm-hmm.
engage, understand all those words rolled into one. And then as the quarter turns, okay, now we're going to then move into this next
Yeah,
one.
if
Is
you
that
have
true?
not seen progress, I should say,
Okay,
on the
okay,
ones that you have been
okay,
working on, because that's the
okay.
important part. You want to understand what compels your donor base to make a change in their behavior. Is it because you're calling them more often? Is it because you're giving them different kinds of updates? Is it because you're inviting them to a different opportunity, right? If you're not seeing any traction, that's where you have kind of an assessment period. Let's call it that quarter where we're saying, this is the strategy. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. Let's say you don't see any change, then it's time for a strategy change. Because that's
Okay.
another big thing I hear in the sector is that, well, we've always done it this way, or we always send this at this time, and we always do it with this language, which is fine if it works. But if it doesn't work, it's time to shift up, change that kind of that strategy a bit.
I love that you're giving us permission to think in new directions. And I think that it's perfect at this time in society, because we know that donor interactions are changing. They're
Mhm.
being cultivated and engaged differently,
Mhm.
looking at impact differently. At the same time, we have this an amazing technological shift, and it's not just AI, it's a lot of things, right? It's a lot of things. And so this, I feel like, is that time in society where we can really jump ahead if we're being more analytical and we're making these investments, right?
Yeah.
Intellectually, financially, time wise, right? I mean, it's just, I
Mhm.
think it's kind of an interesting confluence of things going on. So
I
let's
think
talk. I'm
what you're
sorry, go ahead.
trying to nail down in words here, I think, is that shift from transactional fundraising into more intentional and relationship
Mhm,
building fundraising. Ultimately,
mhm,
our donors want a place to belong. They want to be
mhm,
part of a mission. They want to be part of a solution.
mhm,
And that's the big difference that we're calling out here. I'm not just calling Julia like, hey, Julia, can you give me 50
mhm,
bucks for this
mhm,
food campaign, right? I want to know how Julia's going to feel more supported and how she's going to feel more aligned with my mission. So it really is that change from transactional to relationship focused
mhm.
fundraising.
I love that you said that and you articulated that beautifully, because absolutely, how is that donor going to march
Mhm.
with the organization, right? Super cool. Okay, so then let's keep talking about this. You know, you've talked about the strategy. We've talked about donor retention. With this rolling retention,
Mhm.
how do we then kind of use that for 2026, especially if maybe it's a new concept, right? I mean, I would say for most people here, it's going to be a new concept.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll kind of talk a bit more about the specifics too. I tend to do this thing where I'm like, I'm so familiar with the concept that I'll just blurt out a couple of
Yeah,
things and then
yeah,
I'll think everybody gets it, right? So when we think about this rolling retention, what you want to implement, and even a point of visibility is thinking about the present time frame. And then
mhm,
let's say who gave in that year prior in that time frame. So
mhm,
Julia, if you always give to me in January, I want to be thinking in November and December of the year, like right immediately prior to that. Okay, do we have a plan for Julia? Right.
mhm,
So, a lot of reporting, a lot of fundraising work is reactive, right? We look in the past for what
mhm,
happened then, and we can't always
mhm,
anticipate what's going to happen next. But this is where we can say, if I talk to Julia and I reach out to her and I remind her what's going on at my organization, give her a little bit more of that cause, it's going to make you feel a bit more connected. So,
mhm,
and even I'll use another example that's not crossing over year lines, right? So let's say you give every year in May. In April, I want to know who gave in last May. So even if we're changing that
okay.
time frame a touch, like we're just looking back in the year prior to say who gave in that time period, why did they give? Was it
Right.
because we threw a big special event? Are we doing the event again? If not, what's our conversion plan for trying to get those donors that attended that event to come, right? Because it's
Mhm,
even as simple as a reminder. I can't say how many times I've gone to a special event as a donor, as a ticket purchaser, and I'm like, man, I'd really love to come to this event again, but it's just not on my radar the next year, right? How do we remind those folks and engage them again
mhm,
to make sure that they're kind of remembering about us in that time frame that they typically give, so it's within their kind of patterns of comfort as well.
mhm. Right. And I think that this is a great time to remind, our listeners and viewers that there are 1.8 million registered nonprofits in this country. So there's a lot of competition.
Mm-hmm.
You might be the only one of your types servicing your community, but there's so many choices. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think this is even more important, Kirsten,
Well,
to
and I
get
think that, like
dialed in.
people as well, we're not just single dimensional people. We care
Yeah.
about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes, depending on what things are coming up and what new projects or new initiatives, right? Some other things will take a back seat. And so
Right.
it's how do we keep that cause kind of present?
Right. And I love that you said that, because I think, society shifts, we shift, and there are new things and there are new concerns. And so then um, we change, right? We
Yeah.
change. And I think too, I'm reminded before we finish up our conversation today, I'm reminded of an incredibly wealthy, beloved woman in my community, and she had always given a very significant gift every year. At the same time, exactly what you said, the same month.
Mm-hmm.
And it pretty much set the course for this organization that
Mm-hmm.
was doing amazing work, very important. Everybody, was a love fest in so many ways. And one year the check didn't come in. And then they were like, well, the executive director was like, well, it's late. And then it got later and later. And then they're like, holy crap, maybe the check got lost.
Yeah.
Maybe she's angry with us, whatever. And so the executive director called and said, Mrs. So-and-so, you've been such a valuable partner for us, and we did not receive your gift this year. Is there something, we need to follow through on or whatever? And
Mm-hmm.
she said, you know what? I've been making this donation. And I mean, honest to God, it was like 20 years. And she said, no one ever calls me to say what this money's done.
Yeah.
And frankly, I didn't think that you thought it was important. And it was
That's the big.
devastating. Oh, yeah, it
Yeah.
was devastating. And you know what? I got to think, it was devastating for the group, but I think it was probably devastating for that woman.
Yeah, because I mean,
Her.
to feel that you don't have any power, I mean,
Yeah.
you can look at the psychology behind philanthropy. It's so involved, and even more now, fundraisers are becoming more aware and more kind of present on
Mhm.
how big of an impact it is for them to give and to have an impact, right? So this is where in the sector, if we can be so transparent about what that money is going to do and how that money is going to change something, no matter if it's a $5 donation or a $5 million donation. And
Right.
this is another part. One thing you kind of touched on, this kind of mega donor that we'll call her for example's sake,
Mhm.
right? We know some of the trends in the sector are shifting, where that gap between that the amount of revenue that those major donors are picking up is getting a bit wider from the other kinds of support, right? So we think of this situation, and it's a prime example of, yes, let's make sure we're kind of stewarding our major donors and showing them how important they are, but we're also needing to build other sources of revenue, whether that's recurring, working on your mid-level programs, because those
Yeah.
donors that are doing that now have the potential to become that in the future.
Right.
But if we're not cultivating them and we're not giving them the same amount of attention as we would those major donors, they're just not going to make that growth trajectory into that position.
Right. I absolutely agree with you on that. And I think that, when we step back and we look at this immense transference of wealth in our country, which is a demographic shift, right? There's no magic about it. It's just that we have an aging population that made a lot of money. They're passing away, and they're passing that money forward to their heirs or to their communities. Sometimes they're bypassing their heirs, and it's going directly to things that they felt or they feel are important.
Yeah.
So I love that you just said that. I think that's a brilliant way to end this conversation. That's a whole nother conversation that we need to have,
Awesome.
but just really cool. Really, Kirsten, I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited that you are taking your wisdom and working with the engineering side of the team. That's really, really cool. It's going to be fun to see what new things come out. So keep your eyes peeled, everybody. Kirsten Wantland, she is the principal industry strategist over at Bloomerang, our friends at Bloomerang. And you can learn more about what Bloomerang's doing at bloomerang.com. I'm going to give you a little hint here. You do not need to be a client of Bloomerang to get access to all of their intellectual knowledge and their studies. Yeah, we'd love for you to be one of their clients, but if you go onto bloomerang.com, you will be amazed at the research that they present back out to our sector that can really transform the way you think about your nonprofit, and how you make plans for the future. It's just one of those gems that we don't always talk about. So visit this website and look for their white papers and their reports that they that they work with. It's just riveting, riveting, riveting. Okay, my friend, no pressure, but I expect great things in 2026 from you.
Awesome. I think I do too. It's gonna be a great year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I can't wait to have you come back on to the nonprofit show and we'll learn even more from you. So thank you so much. Really, really fun. Hey, we also want to give thanks to the whole team over at Bloomerang, along with American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. These are the folks that have been with us now for more than 1,400 episodes. We're marching towards 1,500. And it's thanks to these folks, most who have been with us since the very, very first show. So we want to say thank you so much. Okay, my friend, I'm going to say this ending mantra to you directly because you have a lot cooking. And it's a message for everyone, but today it's going right to you, sister. And my message is to stay well so you can do well.